see you guys in the dark.
I'm a 37-year-old female with a 16-year-old son who lives with his dad. It was my first marriage. And a 3-year-old daughter who lives with me and my now husband. I also have a 19-year-old stepdaughter who is pregnant and due any day now. Lives about an hour away with her boyfriend and mom. We live in an apartment complex, and there are about 5 buildings in our grouping. 2 apartment buildings and 3 buildings that are townhomes. And across the street is set up almost the same. So our townhome is across the parking lot and looks directly at one of the apartment buildings. The person that I'm going to talk about, his apartment is directly across from ours. And you can see into my daughter's room at night if the blinds or the lights are on. This gives you an idea of what the layabout is. Also, they are on the 2nd floor and have a balcony. Anyways, it is late, probably about 1 a.m. at night a few months ago, right before Christmas, and my husband and I are outside smoking a cigarette. All of a sudden, an old model Cadillac speeds into the parking lot, slams on its brakes, parking diagonal in the parking space. This guy, I still don't know his name or his girlfriend's name. We'll just call him Mike and her Tasha. Mike gets out of the car very pissed off. He's yelling at Tasha, and then he practically rips her door off as he is opening it. Mike is yelling her to pick up something. Whatever it is was on the floor of the car. They were not going to be quiet about it, so he starts throwing stuff at her. It looked like popcorn or something. Tasha is upset, starts to walk away, like away from the apartment and towards the road. Mike goes after her and is still yelling. He grabs her by the hair and throws her down to the ground. She starts screaming. Mike then notices that we are outside and tries to act all nice to her and to help her get up. He's practically dragging her by the arm back to the car. At this point, my husband goes inside to call the police. I stay outside to make sure I can see what apartment that they live in, or that he doesn't hurt her again, just to keep an eye out while my husband is on the phone. He throws a drink on her and in her face. She goes upstairs, and he chases after her. I see a light go on, and you can see the shadow of them upstairs. Now Mike has never turned his car off or shut the doors of his car. I walk inside. My husband hands me the phone, and I gave the police the rest of the information that they needed. We wait until the police come, and then we go upstairs to my daughter's room to see what is going on, and to see if the police are going to come over, as they usually talk to whoever called. So they are looking at his car and really checking it out, like searching it. I don't know if where I live, if the person that you assaulted needs to file charges for you to be arrested, or if it just appears to be a domestic violence that you automatically get arrested. But anyway, Mike and Tasha end up coming outside. She looked over. He is handcuffed and taken away. She goes back upstairs. This is where things start to hit the fan. Remember, I said that I have kids, and it's around Christmas time, so all of my 2 are here. My parents had come up early, like 3 a.m. early, Christmas Day, and my stepdaughter is coming up early Christmas morning. So it is a couple of days before Christmas. Mike had gotten out of jail and was back home. So I'm outside smoking a cigarette. It's raining. I was under the awning looking at my phone. Mike pulls up in front of my house, just sits there in his car for a moment, until I looked up at him. And then he suddenly pulls out and goes to his side of the parking lot, gets out of his car, and goes into his apartment. Christmas Day comes. We do the Christmas thing with my parents and the kids. All is well that morning. I have my concealed carrying permit, and my dad had bought me a gun for my birthday a month earlier. But since I hadn't had my permit yet, and it was still in his name, he decided to bring it with him, so I didn't get any trouble transporting it over state lines and all of that stuff. So I get it for Christmas, but I put it up in my closet, locked it up when he gave it to me, because of the kids, and I figured that I would get back to it later. So Christmas Day, late afternoon, it was unusually warm this time of year, so the corner store was opened, and I walked down to the store. I can see the store from the back of my townhouse. So I'm walking. Mike is driving towards the apartment complex. He slows down, honks, and then waves. I'm not scared. I'm annoyed. So I flipped him the bird and carried on. Nothing happened for a few more days. At this point, I have been a little more aware and have told my husband and parents about Mike and his weird behaviors. I know this all started because my husband called the police. And Mike must have been smart enough to figure out that it was us, since we were the only other people outside that night. A few days after Christmas, my dad, husband, son, and myself go to the shooting range, so my dad and my husband can practice with my dad's .40, and me and my son can practice with my 9mm. Also, my husband wanted to put his .40 on layaway. My mom stayed home with my daughter. We have a good time shooting, come home, and carry on. My parents leave a day or two later, and my son is here until after New Year's Day. So it is about 11 p.m. My son wants to go to the corner store to buy some junk food. He got money for Christmas, and it was burning a hole in his pocket. So since it had been quiet, I drive him to the store. He goes in. I'm waiting in my car. Mike, out of nowhere, pulls up in his car right beside me and sits there until I look over. Then he leaves. The store has two entrances. One side of it I was on, and one on the opposite side. So I'm looking in my rear view, seeing if Mike leaves. And it was about another 3 minutes until my son came out of the store. I drive around the store to pull back out of the street, and there is Mike between the door of the store and his car, just staring at me. So I stared back and went on my way, of course. I told my husband when I got home. He suggested to make sure that I am carrying when I go anywhere, and to carry my gun when I go outside to smoke. I tell him okay. A few more days pass, and Mike is just being creepy, like lurking around the dumpsters next to my unit, acting like he is talking on his phone, but staring at me the whole time, hanging out on his balcony, which he never did before, at least that I noticed, but I really never even noticed them before the assault. Hanging out and getting chummy with my neighbors, who he had never talked to before. He wasn't doing anything directly to me, but being a little too close for my liking. New Year's Eve comes. The kids go over to the babysitters. We go out. New Year's Day we spend at home. The day after New Year's, my son is going home, and he's a later flight, so we are cleaning and packing his suitcase to go back to his dad's. I'm outside that morning, late morning smoking, and here comes Mike. He asks me about the townhouse in my building. There are about 8 townhomes in my building, asking which ones are vacant, who besides us and my one neighbor lives there. Just odd stuff. I said that I don't know. He said okay and walked down to one of the doors and was knocking. I don't know if that unit is vacant or not. I go inside. About an hour later he knocks on the door and then walks back down to our walkway, standing by our car. I see through the peephole that it is him, and send my husband to answer the door. He starts asking my husband if people can listen to his phone calls and read his text messages if he is connected to Wi-Fi. Then he starts to ask him about some truck or van in the parking lot behind our apartment. My husband told him no about the phone, and he told him that he had no idea about the truck, and then he leaves. A few minutes later, I go upstairs to get dressed. I look out the bedroom window, and Mike is in the strip mall parking lot staring into my bedroom window, which it is daytime. I am sure that he can't see much. He sees me, and then he starts walking towards the parking lot, just looking shady. I call my husband over. Mike is gone by the time my husband gets to the window. A few hours later, we leave to bring my son to the airport. We are gone about 6 hours. On the way home, my stepdaughter calls us asking what time we are going to be home, because she was supposed to come over, and her dad was going to teach her how to make this gumbo. I said that we would be home in a couple of hours. She said that she is going to go shopping at the nearby mall for some baby stuff and head over to our house closer to when we should be home. She had her boyfriend with her as well. So we get home, chat for a minute, and then she is helping her dad make gumbo. I'm making small talk with her boyfriend because we don't know him very well. He is kind of a goober. But if we went to see our granddaughter, we had to be nice and play the game. So after the gumbo making, and just the waiting for it to cook part, my stepdaughter, I'll call her Jane, and her boyfriend Fred. Anyways, Jane steps outside with me to chat, and my 3-year-old comes out with us. It's dark outside, but we have lights, and my little one knows not to leave off the steps. So Jane and I, and my youngest are standing outside chatting. Mike pulls up in the parking lot space right in front of us, turns off his headlights, his car, and just sits there. So I open the door and get my 3-year-old inside. Fred is peeking his head out the door. He starts to step outside. My stepdaughter is going inside. Now that a male is outside, Mike starts up his car and honks, waves, and then leaves to his side. I tell my husband. He goes outside with my gun and watches for a few. Comes back in. We eat. Jane and Fred leave. We put our 3-year-old to bed, and I keep watch for crazy-ass Mike for most of the night. I am literally mad, scared, in shock, and just all pissed off. The next day, I think about all that is going on and realize Mike is totally crazy. He stares in my daughter's window whenever he pulls in and out of the parking lot. Or if I'm standing outside, he stares at me. So I say that I'm going to call the cops, even though I have no proof, but to get his crazy behavior on record. But I decide to wait until my daughter is down for a nap. It's easier to talk to the cops that way. So it is afternoon. I'm home alone like most days. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and my husband works. My daughter is napping. I call the non-emergency line. The cops come, and then I talk to them. While the cops are at my house, on a Sunday, they call a magistrate to see if they need to get a warrant for his arrest. Since it was right on the line that they figured they would ask, the magistrate says no, because it isn't considered really harassment by the letter of the law. But they ask me if I want them to make contact with Mike, who was home at the time. I was a little hesitant because if I said no, I know he would continue on. If I said yes, he would either stop or escalate it. But I told them to go ahead and talk to him. He surprisingly came outside when they walked over there. Not really surprising. I'm sure he was watching. They basically told him to cut the crap or he was going to go to jail, and then they left. A few days later, nothing happened since the cops talked to him, thank God. My husband is talking to the maintenance guy about something that needed fixing. They get along pretty well. So he is telling him about Mike. Joe, the maintenance guy, says that we should tell Ashley, who happens to be our property manager. So a couple of hours after Joe finishes up at our place, we have to go out anyways. So we stop by the office, talk to Ashley. So we tell her from beginning to end what has happened. She said that we are not the only tenants to complain about Mike, and he isn't on the lease. Only his girlfriend Tasha is, and Tasha was pregnant at the time. They had also talked to Tasha in the past about Mike. She didn't listen to them. So he isn't supposed to be here. Ashley says that she is waiting for a call back from our courtesy officer, and they are going to tell him he has to leave and trespass him if he comes back. Ashley isn't one to do her job, and I doubt she actually had anything done, because a few weeks later she got fired, and a new company took over the property. But since Mike no longer bothered me, I left it alone. Everything has been fine since then. Tasha had her baby about a month and a half ago, and he is still there, with her and the baby. 2 weeks ago, Mike and Tasha are screaming at each other on the balcony at 7 a.m. Apparently she called the cops this time. He left before the cops came. They took a report. I think he is gone for good, since he didn't come back for a week and a half. Just the other day, he comes back. He hasn't done anything, but he is staring whenever he sees me. So Mike, I really don't want to actually talk, come in contact with each other ever again. Stay on your side of the parking lot, dude. Several years ago, I was around 15. My dad hired a neighbor who was down on his luck to help around our farm. Stereotypical. His wife had left him, took his kids, he lost his job. He was a bit depressing to be around, and sort of weird, but we never had any problem out of him until the day he showed up drunk. He had been down at the barn for a few hours pitching hay. Around lunchtime, he walked up to the house, knocked on the door. I answered, and he asked for some water. I went and got him some. He started asking me all sorts of personal questions, like if I had a boyfriend. Were we serious? Then it turned into, do you have sex? Has he fucked you good? And it was during this whole thing that I noticed that he was drunk. I immediately left him on the porch, went inside, and locked the door. I found my mom, told her what he said. She called my dad, who had came back to the house, and told him that it would be best if he left. He told him his job out at the farm was over. He left without incidents, and for the next few hours, we didn't hear a peep out of him. My parents needed to take a meal to an elderly couple down the road and asked if I wanted to come along. I told them no, that I had homework, and that I would be fine alone. They would only be a couple of miles away, and I would call if I really needed them. About 5 minutes after they left, I heard a car door slam. I looked out the blinds very suddenly, and it was him. He staggered to the porch and finally made it up the steps. He knocked on the door. This whole time I'm trying to call my parents. My dad's phone just rings, and rings with no answer. My mom's phone gets straight to voicemail, so I tried the neighbor's phone. It also just rings with no answer. By this point, the handyman is beating his fist on the door, yelling that he knows that I'm in the house, and that I'm alone. He tries to open the door. I'm freaking out. I call 911, tell the operator what's going on. She gets my information and says that an officer will be over soon, and she hangs up the phone. Now I'm really freaking out, and handyman is still beating on the door. Suddenly it stops. I peek out again, and he is walking around the side of the house. He tries every outside door, trying to kick them in, yelling and screaming at me. He's still yelling that he knows that I'm inside alone, and that when he gets in, he's going to make my fat ass pay. I'm watching him this whole time through the tiny slivers in the blinds. I thought about hiding, but I wanted to keep my eyes on him. I'm also still trying over and over to reach my parents to no avail. Once again, everything suddenly stops, and I see him make his way back around to his truck and speed off. Seconds later, I hear the police siren. The police officer takes my statement, but says that there isn't much that he can do because he didn't catch him on our property. He says he will try to catch him driving since he has been obviously drinking. He left and came back a few minutes later. Said that his truck was parked at his house, and there wasn't anything to be done other than press charges for trespassing since he had already been told to leave that day. During this last conversation is when my parents finally show up. Imagine their horror, pulling into the drive, seeing a cruiser with its lights on. We end up pressing charges and going to court. Before we went to court, he would drive by our house, yelling vulgar things at us. Sometimes he would pull into the drive and sit there watching for a minute before pulling off. He never stayed long enough for the police to catch him. At court, he didn't really get into much trouble. He was told to stay away from us and our property. The judge issued a restraining order. His lawyer had tried to say that during handyman's time working for my dad, that I had flirted with him, led him on, believing that I was interested in him. I absolutely did no such thing, and even if I had, I was 15 years old. He was a grown-ass man in his 40s. After our court date, I never did see him anymore. He stopped driving by, didn't pull into the driveway. Everything just stopped, thankfully, although it did nothing to ease my fears. A few years after all of this, he fell out of a tree. Hunting while intoxicated is what I heard, and he was injured pretty bad. Now he is unable to care for himself. I think his sister had to move in with him to take care of him. About 4 years ago, in my younger and literally more naive 20s, I worked as a tutor for a small business in a newly developing area of the town that I grew up in. Needless to say, I felt safe, and I knew some of the customers coming in as the kid brothers and sisters to friends I had in high school. Colleagues were all amazing, and truly this was the first job where I felt like family business meant family in every sense of the word. Everyone was just treated so well and taken care of. Because this was a newly developing area, it also meant that we were quite far from the suburbs, and even more main points of the city. Eventually it would all connect. But for now, it was just an expanse of dark hills and clusters of light where businesses were being put up one by one. In our own little block, we had a pizzeria, a sushi restaurant, and a sandwich shop. That was it for miles unless you wanted to cross the road to visit the grocery store. Then darkness for more miles until you hit the first track of farms that buffered between the suburbs, cities, and our own spot in the hills. Needless to say, this meant two things. You either brought your own lunch, or you would be stuck in an endless loop of pizza and sandwich shop options forever. 2, Walking or driving at night was always scary. Anyways, it became a habit for one of us to order dinner for the whole office one night a week when we had to stay past our late tutoring appointment, which was usually around 8 p.m., to complete an office meeting, or else put in some overtime on paperwork and progress reports for the kids. Usually it was customary to call either the sandwich shop or the pizzeria, and then just send 1 or 2 people over to pick up the order, as there were about 15 to 20 employees at the tutoring place at any given point. So it would be a lot for one person to carry alone. However, the night in question when the story takes place involved only 3 late-night workers, as everyone else had to bow out for health or family emergency-related reasons. That meant that it was just myself, my now boyfriend, and our coworker who would be the only ones to complete overtime. All of us in our early or mid-20s, and no one from management. 3 people meant the order would be easy enough for one person to carry, and it was my turn to go. Having sat down at a desk all day and being faced with a couple hours more of sitting, I decided it would be better for me to walk down to the end of the block to order and pick up the sandwiches. Besides, I like the sandwich shop workers, and I thought that I could shoot the breeze with them. It was at that time that I saw my last client of the day standing in line with his family at the counter. Kids are always such cute spazzes whenever they see their instructor or tutors outside of the educational context. It literally blows their minds that we exist outside of the classroom, and Micah was no different at that age. He kept tugging at his mom's skirt and whispering, "It's Miss So-and-so, from the tutoring place. Look, Mom, can I go talk to her?" Until finally his mom glances over at me and just gave me that, "Sorry, I know you're off the clock, and you literally just saw him, but..." Look, to which I just waved at Micah over while his mom completed their order of 3 sandwiches. She had her newborn with her, so I knew that she would use that respite. Micah proceeded to tell me, and the whole sandwich shop, all about his science project, which was due next week, and it was a nice little break for a little while. Standing quite closely to Micah was a man I assumed to be his father. There was a likeness in their features, and he looked down strangely at me as Micah began talking, almost like the man was trying to figure out who I was exactly. It's a look that I get frequently from the fathers of the children I tutored at that time. Let's be honest. Moms all over the world bear the brunt of the second shift at home. This guy looked like he worked one of those jobs. Business-like, clearly fancy, financial, or legal work from the look of his watch, briefcase, and his suits. And he probably put in a lot of overtime. If only he could be joining them for dinner, and then heading back to the office. I don't know what made me think that based on the brief interaction, but it was the feeling that I got. Although it was because he was standing protectively over Micah, and yet distantly. At the same time, he never once looked at his wife, or asked her who I was. That should have tipped me off that something was off about him. "Aren't you being real chatty today?" the man said. Micah looked up at him and beamed a little smile. "Is this your teacher?" "Kinda," Micah replied sheepishly before skirting back to his mom, who was about to reach the cashier. The man then turned his full attention on me, eyes like an eagle. I could tell he was already trying to size me up and making a mental catalog of everything. Tall, average build, raccoon-eyed woman is what he saw that night. My disability is invincible unless I need my cane for the day. And I didn't need it that day. "I'm Robert," he said, and extended his hand for me to shake. I took it without thinking twice. The grip was weird, overly aggressive, definitely a businessman. And I gripped back as hard as I could, hoping that it would get him to back off. He eventually did let go. The cashier glanced over, then at me, and froze in place, her face inscrutably blank. Her hands paused mid-air as she handed cash back to the person ahead of Micah's family. A different worker came up to take my order. In between ordering my food and talking to Robert, I didn't look back at Marta for a while, and I honestly didn't think twice about her reaction. From there, I don't remember the particulars of what started the conversation, or how it got to where it did, but I was only extra chatty about my life and stuff because I thought that he knew most of what I was telling him, either through Micah or his mother. He told me all about his first business venture in music, that he had his own small recording studio and company for indie bands still as a side business, that he hoped his kids would take over one day, or at least work in music as a legacy, You get it. What about work, though? I honestly thought that he meant my job as one of Micah's tutors. I thought that he meant, what about securing a better paying job with my current degree? If you can't tell by now, I was pretty naive, about 20-something years old. Oh, you know, doing tutoring for now until I can get my grad degree completed, then who knows what. Although, since the accident, I have to really think twice about what kind of job I'll need in the long run to keep the injury from worsening over time. Up until now, things had been normal. He'd kept pace with Micah and his mom in line as we'd moved along with it, now sharpened in his gaze. This really made him perk up. You're injured? Yeah, might need back surgery sometime in the future. For now, I'm pretty good going with just therapy. So you can't run or walk fast? What an odd thing to ask, I paused. What? You said that you have a back injury. Is there anything else that you can't do? It must be difficult for your boyfriend. That was wildly inappropriate. I felt shocked to the core. How old did you say you were? 23 in October. You look good for 23. You look like you could be younger than 18. Do you sing? You never did say. The last remark did it for me. This was behavior that was disturbing in any context, but which I understood better than randos on the street. Not from the fathers of my tutoring kids. I felt like someone had slapped me across the face. Micah's dad or not, this was not happening. At that point, I turned to complain to Micah's mom. And that's when I saw them leaving. The bell above the door tinkled. Micah and his mom were walking out. Their sandwich bag is in tow. Micah, sweet boy that he was, shouted out, "Bye! Bye!" The sudden realization that I had divulged personal information, like my workplace, grad school location, and thanking him for the lovely gift cards to my favorite shops that I'd received from Micah, to a complete stranger hit me right then and there. He'd had ample opportunity to correct me on the nature of his relationship, which was none to Micah. He now knew Micah's name and all about his science project, which admittedly he indulged himself to the whole shop, but also Micah's school. Dread pulled at the pit of my stomach, and then fear took over. There were only 3 of us, and I had to lock up that night too. In about 2 hours' time, I'd be alone to do cleanup and lock-up duties. Robert laughed and waved back, and then turned back to me with what I can only describe as a dead serious, humorless look on his face. You were saying? Marta came over at that point, swapped places with the sandwich artist. She told him something along the lines of, "Fuck off, Robert," beneath her breath, which shocked me. Marta was incredibly sweet and kind, and the thought of her cursing was about the last thing that I thought she would ever do from what I have known from her. Sure, Marta, I'll see you around, honey bunny. But he didn't leave. He simply got into his car, which was parked in the front of the sandwich place, and he sat there watching us as Marta packed up my order and helped me call the tutoring place for an escort back. She told me about Robert then, a real first-grade creep who liked to come in and tease her. That's what management called it, and if she didn't need the money so badly, she would have just left months ago. But she was getting close to re-establishing a savings, and she needed at least 2 more pay periods before she could go. I later found out that she didn't wait for the second pay period. She left only 2 weeks later, and it was sudden, but the manager insisted that she left in broad daylight and got into a friend's car halfway through the shift, so I guess Robert didn't get to her, at least. Not that I know of. And yeah, I asked, of course. Even after my colleagues came for me, Robert watched from the car. I hooked my arm through my colleague's arm. Marta didn't explain anything to him, just that I needed help, and I'm sure that I surprised him with a small action. He didn't ask, though. Once we got back, my colleague kept quiet in front of the other, recognizing my need for privacy. The 2 of them ate, but I couldn't bear to stomach anything. I was still reeling from that interaction. I completed paperwork instead to keep my hands and my brain busy. There were only 2 incidences that night. Robert walked past the glass wall of our front door. I managed to see him before he saw me, so I hid behind one of the hallways and busied myself with sorting flashcards, even though they were already in order. The colleagues who knew what was going on, more or less, signaled once Robert was gone. The other one left as soon as her paperwork was done for the night. She had a kid to get back to, and then I was alone with my now boyfriend. She made a big show of helping me to lock up, and as we walked past Robert's car, which was now parked off to the side, but closer to our store, my now boyfriend wrapped his arms around me and got into my car with me. We drove down and around the hill as I told him about what had happened in the sandwich shop. By the time we got back to the parking lot, Robert's car wasn't around. My colleague waited until I got into my car and drove after me. We lived close to each other, only streets away, so it was a little bit like having a guardian angel that night. I worked at the tutoring place for another 3 years before leaving, and all that time, I never once did see Robert again. But I can't drive past that tract of land, no matter how different it looks now, without thinking about that awful, awful conversation. Sometimes I lie awake at night and wonder if something about him is a lie. Is his name really Robert? Does he really have a music record label company? Or are these things he tells young girls to gain their confidence, and then really hurt them? So, fuck off, Robert. Also, I hope he isn't preying on young women. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.